Today is Tuesday, March 20th, 2012, and this is Fos de Sueños After Dark. Today we have Past Sins, Chapter 11, The Castle of Nightmare by Penstroke, assisted by Betty Gloom. They were too late. Even when they had her in their sights, they were too late. Princess Celestia's worst fears had come true. Nyx had become Nightmare Moon, and Celestia had been the one to deliver her to those that would complete her transformation. While Princess Luna lingered in Ponyville to find out more about what happened, Celestia went straight back to Canterlot. Upon arriving at the palace, she ordered for her generals to be summoned. She didn't care if they needed to be roused from their beds or pulled from their spouses. Celestia needed to speak with them immediately, and was making rare use of her royal rank to make sure it happened. That had been a few minutes prior, and most of her trusted guards were already off fetching the generals. This left Celestia with a moment to herself, and she decided to spend it sitting on her throne. She needed some time to rest, but also to think. Princess Celestia thought back, and began to scrutinize every recent memory she had of Spellnexus. Surely there had to have been a clue. Surely there had to be a sign of his treachery, yet she could not remember a single instance of doubt. Spellnexus betraying her would be like Twilight Sparkle betraying her. It just didn't seem possible. Yet, that impossibility had become reality. Spellnexus had betrayed her, but before Princess Celestia could figure out why, she was drawn from her thoughts. She heard the doors to the throne room open and looked to see who had entered the room. She didn't think her generals could have arrived so quickly, and they hadn't. The pony that was now striding across the room, moving with purpose in each step, was her sister, Luna. Princess Celestia rose from her throne and walked to meet her.
Luna, I am surprised you were able to return so quickly. Have you already finished interviewing the residents of Ponyville?
Luna did not reciprocate the warm welcome her sister offered, choosing instead to glare at Celestia.
I delegated that task to a number of guards because there is only one pony I want to talk to at the moment. You. What have you been hiding from me?
Celestia winced under Luna's firm tone. She quickly realized the conversation she and her sister were about to have wasn't going to be one of their better ones. Still, she maintained her composure and put on a caring face.
I don't know what you mean, sister. Don't sister me, Celestia,
Luna said with words laden with her anger.
You know something about what has just transpired in Ponyville, and of the strange mare that was seen there. Now, I shall ask you once more, what have you been hiding from me?
Celestia turned away from her sister, unable to look her in the eyes as she began to recount the truth.
Just a little after the end of winter, a cult pony napped my personal student, Twilight Sparkle, as part of an elaborate spell that would have done the unthinkable. I'm happy to say that Twilight suffered nothing worse than a small cut on her leg and some rope burns. The spell in question, however, was designed to take the shreds left behind when you were saved by the elements of harmony and... And do what? Luna pressed. The spell would have taken those shreds, the lingering magic and echoes of the mare you used to be, and used to give them Nightmare Moon her own body. Give Nightmare Moon her own body?
Luna echoed in disbelief.
What? How is that even possible? I was Nightmare Moon. I became that mare when I let my anger and jealousy get the best of me. I became that mare when I stole magic to make myself more powerful, but all those powers and emotions were destroyed by the elements of harmony.
Princess Celestia shook her head.
They were not destroyed, Luna. The elements of harmony are not a force of destruction. They could only separate you from the power and jealousy that once possessed you. What was left were those shreds.
But how? Luna asked.
How could power and some lingering echoes of my emotions be enough to make a full-grown mare? I do not claim to fully understand it, Celestia said. But you know how magic works just as well as I do. Truly pure magic is a rare thing. Any magic from a pony can carry with it an echo of its owner. It's why some spells are stronger when driven by emotions like anger and happiness. It's why no two unicorns have the same magic. Magic and soul are very closely tied. And because of this,
Celestia continued as she shifted on her hooves,
I can only assume that an echo of the mare you used to be, an echo of Nightmare Moon, lingered in the shreds that the elements of harmony left behind. That was what the resurrection spell was meant to target. If my understanding is correct, the spell was supposed to distill and strengthen those echoes as well as feed them raw magic. It would be from that concentration of magic, emotions, and memories that the cult would reform Nightmare Moon.
Luna shifted to the side, anxious confusion filling her mind.
But even if the spell formed a body, that would not be enough. For Nightmare Moon to even be alive, for her to be a completely separate mare from me, wouldn't that mean she would have to have her own... It doesn't matter anymore,
Celestia interrupted, turning back to face Luna.
The simple truth that we must deal with is that Nightmare Moon has returned, and we must stand against her.
Luna nodded as she took a few steps forward. She pushed her confusion to the side and focused a steely glaze on her sister.
I do not disagree with you on that fact. Something must be done. But I must ask you one more question first. If all of this happened just after winter, then why am I only finding out about it now? I didn't want to burden you with this knowledge,
Celestia answered with a caring tone.
It was something that I was supposed to deal with so that you wouldn't have to. Celestia, what is wrong with you?
Luna shouted, disbelief and anger flaring in her voice.
What made you think I wouldn't want to help you handle this? I was Nightmare Moon once. Everything that mare did was my fault. If somehow some pony were to bring that mare back as a complete separate pony, then it's my fault for being her in the first place. Luna, stop it. You aren't responsible. Yes, I am. It's my fault,
Luna argued and stomped her hoof. She turned away, unable to look Celestia as guilt writhed in her stomach.
There wouldn't even be a Nightmare Moon if it weren't for my mistakes. I just felt that.
Celestia tried to comfort her sister only to be cut off. Luna glanced over her shoulder and whispered,
When were you going to tell me about this? Sister, please. Were you going to tell me about this?
Luna asked, her voice gaining more strength. She turned back to Celestia and made no effort to hide the anger billowing inside her. Celestia opened her mouth to answer, but she was unable to say anything. Luna got her answer from that silence, and her anger only grew.
You weren't! You weren't going to tell me anything ever! You were hoping to keep this whole thing a secret. I was only trying to protect you, Celestia said, trying to defend herself. I was just trying to keep you from having to... Keep me from what? Keep me from taking responsibility from my past? Keep me from doing what I can for the sake of our kingdom, for our ponies. Nightmare Moon, either as what I was or what she is now, is still my responsibility. You should have told me about this from the very beginning.
Luna brought up her hooves and stomped them on the ground in an attempt to vent some of the rage boiling up inside her.
If anything, the fact that she and I were once one and the same makes me more qualified to deal with this situation than you. At the very least, if our roles were reversed, I would have told you the truth. I know, Celestia admitted. And perhaps you are a better mare than me in that regard. Yet, sister, you've had enough to deal with. You've only just started to settle back into castle life and have only got up with Equestria's history and laws. You've been working yourself to the bone so you can help me rule. I just didn't want to burden you any further.
Luna huffed, but after a few tense moments nodded her head.
I understand, Tia. I do. You've been protective of me since I came back, and I appreciate that. Yet, while you are my older sister, we are both princesses of this kingdom. I hope in the future you'll trust me enough to tell me when these things happen.
Celestia lowered her head apologetically.
I will try, sister. I guess that will have to do for the moment,
Luna grumbled, choosing to focus her frustration on more pressing matters.
Now, we should send word to your student and her friends. I imagine we will need them to wield the elements of harmony against Nightmare Moon once more.
Celestia tensed and heaved a sigh.
We may not be able to rely on the elements of harmony.
Luna tilted her head to the side.
Why not? Do you remember Twilight's cousin, Nyx? The one who played Nightmare Moon during the children's play last spring festival?
Of course, Luna said with a nod.
Why do you ask? That filly was never Twilight's cousin, nor is she even related to Twilight by any familial connection. In fact, she had never been seen before until her arrival in Ponyville a few days after Twilight was rescued.
Luna needed a moment to take in the information, yet when she realized why Celestia would bring up Nyx, Her jaw dropped and her eyes narrowed in disbelief.
No. You can't be saying... You don't mean to tell me that...
Yes, Celestia confirmed.
The filly known as Nyx was the incomplete product of the original resurrection spell. This evening, the cult got their hooves on her, and they were able to finish the spell they started. In truth, Nyx was always Nightmare Moon, but tonight the cult returned to her all her memories and powers she once possessed.
But how did they get a hold of her? Luna asked, her face reflecting her confusion.
I spoke with a few ponies in Ponyville before departing. They said that the cult appeared, and that Nightmare Moon rose up from the very center of the spell. They never saw any pony being taken into the ritual, and surely Twilight would have sent a letter if she feared Nyx was missing.
No, she wouldn't have, Celestia admitted with a whisper.
Why?
Celestia swallowed as she struggled to find the strength to admit her own mistake.
Because I was the one that took Nyx. I was the one that delivered her into the hooves of that cult.
Luna was struck silent. She strode up beside her sister, expecting the punchline to what she believed could only be a cruel joke. Yet, the expression on Celestia's face made it clear that she was telling the truth, and Luna was only more stunned.
What? How? Why would you do that? For some time now, I have feared that Nyx was Nightmare Moon, or at least somehow tied to the spell cast just after winter, Celestia confessed. At a school function, she was able to turn another pony into a tree and displayed other magic well beyond unicorns her age. My dreams became tormented with images of her growing into the mare you used to be and threatening every pony I care about. I had to be sure she wasn't a threat, Celestia admitted. I had to know what I was dealing with so I could act before Nyx became a danger to Equestria, to Twilight, or to you. So I spoke with Spell Nexus, and he promised a spell that would allow me to glimpse into Nyx's soul. The spell was supposed to allow me to know, for certain, if she was a danger. But of course,
Celestia growled. She tossed her head as her frustration flared.
It would seem that the greatest threat came not from Nyx, but from Spell Nexus. He was attacked at the beginning of last fall, his home ransacked for the shreds of Nightmare Moon. He was hospitalized for weeks after, and he showed no signs of treachery. Yet, he not only seems to be a member of that cult, but a high-ranking one. He was once my student!
Celestia bellowed, punctuating her words with a stomp.
Why would he betray me? I do not know, Celestia, but that isn't the question pressing on my mind,
Luna said, steering the conversation back to the matters at Hoof.
The question I've asked, the one that you have yet to answer, is why we cannot rely on the elements of harmony. Because I do not dare ask a mother to strike down her own daughter.
Celestia seethed, her anger at Nexus shifting into loathing of her own actions.
Not when I was the one who tore that daughter away. Mother? Daughter? Celestia, who are you talking about?
Luna asked. Celestia sighed and hung her head.
I speak of Twilight and Nyx. Since the end of winter, my student has been caring for Nyx. From what Twilight has told me, it began as just her wanting to be sure. Like me, she feared that Nyx was Nightmare Moon. But she did not want to risk an innocent filly being banished to the moon. Thus, until she could be certain, Twilight kept Nyx a secret, disguised her alicorn nature, and allowed her to live a normal life in Ponyville. Yet, it seems in the months they spent together, Twilight Sparkle grew to be more than just a caretaker for Nyx.
Celestia began to struggle with her words.
She became an adoptive mother, and cared for Nyx like a daughter.
A horrified expression formed on Luna's face.
And is that why we cannot rely on the elements of harmony? Did you steal Nyx away from Twilight? Sister, it's one thing to keep this a secret from me, but what could have possessed you to... Do you realize that... I am fully aware of what I have done,
Celestia bellowed, cutting off Luna's accusation.
No, I don't think you are,
Luna shouted back.
Don't you think Twilight would have noticed if Nyx acted like the mare I used to be? Don't you think she would have sent you a letter if she feared something was wrong? You once told me you trusted Twilight completely. Why would you doubt her on something so serious? And why couldn't you wait?
Luna continued to rant.
If Nyx was going to become Nightmare Moon, there would have been warnings. Signs! She wouldn't have just transformed overnight. Why did you think you had to act before there was an actual threat? You realize that it's your own fault this happened, don't you? It's your fault, Nightmare Moon. I know!
Celestia shouted, her composure breaking like a frail twig. The exhaustion and emotions that she had been trying to control overwhelmed her.
Do you actually think for a second, for a moment, that I wanted to do any of this, to cause my dear students such pain? I do not need to be told the heinous nature of my actions. I went to Twilight's home to take that child, unaware of how much my student had grown to care for her. But I could not wait for Nyx to become Nightmare Moon, Celestia said with a flare of her wings. I could not wait until that witch was standing on our doorstep with half of Equestria destroyed in her wake. I had to act preemptively. I had to be able to prepare, to get ready, so that if Nyx did change into Nightmare Moon, I would be ready to stop her before any pony got hurt.
But why couldn't you wait, Celestia?
Luna shouted back at her sister, her voice echoing across the throne room.
Why did you feel you had to act?
Because the last time I waited, I lost you for 1,000 years,
Celestia screamed. The fire in Luna's anger cooled under the weight of those words, and she watched Celestia crumble in front of her. Her sister hung her head so her low nose almost touched the floor, as the guilt, fear, and pain in her heart became too much for her to bear. Luna even saw a few tears escape Celestia's eyes, curl down her face, and drip to the throne room floor.
The last time I waited, Celestia said quietly, the last time I decided to just wait and see if things would get better or worse, was when you were showing the first signs of your jealousy. I hoped you would get through it. I thought that surely the ponies of Equestria would begin to appreciate your knight as I did. I decided to wait, to let things work themselves out, and we both know what happened because of that. So condemn me for what I've done, Luna. It's no less than I deserve,
Celestia said. She raised her head to meet Luna's gaze, but the tears continued to flow on her face.
I stole a daughter from her mother because I feared the monster she could become. And because of my actions, I made those fears a reality. I, however, couldn't just sit by and wait. I couldn't give Nightmare Moon the chance to hurt Twilight. I couldn't let her hurt you. I just couldn't stand by and hope that things would work out. Not again.
Sister, Luna said, her voice carrying the first comforting tone she had offered since the conversation had begun. Celestia, however, shied away from the comfort. She turned away and moved back towards the throne.
But I can't think of that now. I can't think of what I could have done differently. I can only focus on what's ahead. The threat Nightmare Moon poses. I must be ready to stand against her. Not I, sister. We.
Luna corrected. She moved up beside Celestia as a reassuring smile spread to her lips.
Just as Nightmare Moon threatens me, she threatens you. And I'm not going to let her hurt my big sister. We'll work together. We'll find a way, and if she won't listen to reason, we'll do what is necessary to protect Equestria.
Celestia returned Luna's smile and nodded her head and leaned into her.
Thank you, Luna. I don't think I could have faced this if you weren't beside me. That's what sisters are for, Tia.
Nightmare Moon stood in an elegant hall, taking in its beauty. Regal black marble columns flanked either side of the hall and rose to support a high, arched ceiling. Rich purple curtains were draped from the columns, and torch holders glowed with magical white gems. The finest detail of the room, however, was the ceiling. It was encrusted with diamonds, and each one had been carefully placed so that the ceiling was a portrayal of the nighttime sky. One gem in particular, which looked to be as big as Nightmare Moon's head, had been used to mimic the full moon in all its glory. "Does it please you, my queen?" Spellnexus asked with a respectful bow. "It does," Nightmare Moon replied. She strode forward and approached her new throne. The throne had rich, night blue cushions, and its frame was made of rare black oak from Dragon Country. It was a beautiful sight, and Nightmare Moon settled down into it. She fluttered her wings, and a contented smile formed on her lips as she looked across the room. It was her throne room, and it was only complemented by her own elegant beauty.
You have done well, Spellnexus, Nightmare Moon said. But I am curious. How did you manage to construct such a grand room in secrecy?
It is not just this room, my queen, but a whole castle. Spellnexus replied. He rose from his bow and approached the throne. We found an unexpected ally in a clan of wild mutts known as the Diamond Dogs. They were a more than willing workforce once we promised to assist them in their search for precious gemstones. They dug out this entire cavern and then assisted in the construction of the castle. Spellnexus continued to explain. And once you have defeated Celestia and Luna, there is but a few dozen feet of rock that separates this castle from the world above. Should you wish, your highness, it would be trivial for you to raise the castle to the surface. It would be a grand proclamation of your new place as Equestria's ruler. Nightmare Moon's smile widened, and she pictured her castle rising up and casting a harsh shadow across the land. Yes, it was a good thought, but one she would have to save for later. She could not raise the castle before defeating the royal sisters, and her curiosity was not yet sated. Tell me, why were the Diamond Dogs willing to put forth so much effort for the gemstones? I do not know, your majesty, Spellnexus answered. We never questioned why the Diamond Dogs wanted the gems. Perhaps they're like dragons and eat them, or perhaps they just like to roll around in piles of gemstones as hogs roll in mud. In the end, does the reason really matter? The important thing was that they were a strong, fast, and willing workforce. Nightmare Moon's eyes flashed. Spellnexus's answer was only adding fuel to the fire of her curiosity. What did the Diamond Dogs do with the gems? Was Nexus right? Did they use them as a source of food like dragons, or did they in fact roll around in them? But wouldn't rolling around in the gemstones hurt? Perhaps they had thick skin, or maybe they used the gems in another way. Perhaps they used them to make clothes, or used them as a source of currency. Those initial questions were quickly joined by others as Nightmare Moon's mind spun ahead of itself. Did the Diamond Dogs recognize the Royal Pony Sisters, or did they consider themselves outside the rule of Equestria? Did they have a form of government? Who was their leader? There were simply too many questions, and Nightmare Moon would have at least some of them answered. Spellnexus, I want to see the leader of the Diamond Dogs. If their leader is unavailable, or if they have no leader, then I want to speak with a selection of them. I imagine 3 or 5 will be sufficient. Nexus looked up at Nightmare Moon with equal parts of curiosity, concern, and confusion. Forgive me, your highness, but part of our agreement with the Diamond Dogs was that at the conclusion of our deal they would migrate much further into the tunnels. We could not risk them interfering with our work. A frown formed on Nightmare Moon's lips. She hated she wouldn't be able to find an answer to this question. That was her vice, her insatiable curiosity. That was why she loved to sit in Cherylee's classroom every day while she was still in school. Oh, how she had found such joy in learning new things from the mulberry-colored pony who... Nightmare Moon shut her eyes and seized control of the thoughts that started to run out of control in her mind. She could not think of these memories anymore. She was a queen, and Cherylee was no longer her teacher. Cherylee, like every pony else, was just a subject of her kingdom that needed to be brought in line, and nothing more. I see, Nightmare Moon said as she turned her gaze back to Spellnexus. That is unfortunate. Still, if any pony happens to see a Diamond Dog, have them brought to me. There are some questions I would like answered. As you wish, your majesty, Spellnexus said with another bow. Now, your highness, please allow me to show you the rest of your new castle. Nightmare Moon followed behind Nexus as he gave her a grand tour of her new home. The castle really was beautiful, every bit as regal as Canterlot Palace. Yet, Nightmare Moon found herself questioning some of the decorations. Around almost every corner there was a mural or statue depicting her. That alone would have been creepy, but it wasn't just the quantity of images portraying her, it was also how she was being portrayed. Each mural and statue depicted something different, but each visual was dark and threatening. One had her standing over the beaten and defeated bodies of Celestia and Luna. Another had her casting a shadow over cowering ponies. They were all images of the future Equestria could look forward to, and it left a strange feeling in the pit of Nightmare Moon's stomach. And here is the Royal Library, Nexus announced, drawing Nightmare Moon's attention away from the castle decorations as the pair entered the library. Please forgive the lack of books on the shelves. We built it to be able to house the collection from Canterlot Palace. Once you have taken your place as Equestria's one true queen, we intend to move the collection from there to here, should you wish to continue using this castle as your palace. Nightmare Moon nodded and let her gaze drift across the mostly empty shelves. This was just as impressive as the rest of the castle. The towering bookshelves dominated the walls, and the entire room was wrapped in a cool, dark color scheme. Yet, she found one aspect of the decor unappealing. There was a painting above the library's fireplace, which showed her standing over the charred, blackened ruins of Canterlot. Why did every painting, mural, and statue in her castle have to make her look so threatening? Deciding that she would leave that thought for another time, Nightmare Moon strolled around the room. She took notice of the few Pegasus ponies fluttering about, putting away some books that had been gathered for her collection. Like all the other servants and guards she had seen, the Pegasi possessed something that drew her curiosity. "Why do all of you have eyes like mine?" Nightmare Moon asked. "It is your blessing, my queen," Nexus replied, swelling with pride. "As you may know, I was once the headmaster of Celestia's school for gifted unicorns. Upon your initial defeat, Celestia tasked me with studying your shredded remains. It was upon examining and interacting with those shreds that I became enlightened to your wisdom and power. It was on that same day that my eyes turned to the turquoise color you see now, and it became a sign of the order. I bestow the gift of these eyes upon each pony who joins the Children of Nightmare when they pledge their service to you." Nightmare Moon nodded, turning her attention back to the shelves as she perused the few books in the library's existing collection. She didn't recognize most of the book titles, but one of the books did catch her eye. Coming to a stop, she used her magic to remove the book from the shelf. She gently cracked it open and flipped it open to the title page, Grand Tales of Equestria.
And with that final buck, the wolves were driven from the town, Twilight said before looking up at the book she was reading aloud. And the ponies rejoiced. They had once again been saved by the mare among them, brave enough to stand out at the night, the village's own black-coated guardian, Nyx of the Night. "And did you really name me after her?" Nyx asked in disbelief. She was lying in her bed, and she snuggled further into the covers as Twilight shut the book which had been the source of that evening's bedtime story. Twilight laughed and set the book down. "Yes, though I'll admit it was mostly because she's the only other pony I've ever heard of with a black coat." Do you think I could be as brave as she was someday?" Nyx asked. "Of course," Twilight answered with a smile. "Being brave isn't like a special talent. You just have to be able to stand up against the things that scare you." "Have you ever had to stand up against something really scary?" Twilight nodded. "Yes, I have. This one time, my friends and I had to go convince a dragon to leave his cave and go live someplace else."
Nyx's eyes went wide.
"Really?" "Oh, yes. He was taking a nap in the nearby mountains, and his snoring was throwing all kinds of black smoke up into the air. So Princess Celestia asked."
Twilight stopped her story, scrunched up her nose, and looked at Nyx before playfully tapping her on the nose.
"Hey, you just got a bedtime story. You don't need another."
Nyx complained.
"But what about the dragon?" "I promise I'll tell you the story tomorrow night,"
Twilight assured before she gently kissed Nyx on the forehead.
"Now go to sleep."
"Okay."
Nyx replied with a yawn before letting her eyes slide shut. Your Majesty. Nightmare Moon shook her head, snapping the book shut and replacing it on the shelf before looking into Spell Nexus. My apologies. I can get caught up in my reading. No apologies necessary, my queen. This is, after all, your library. It is yours to enjoy whenever you desire. Nexus replied, though there is still much of the castle to see. Then lead on. Let me see all that you have prepared for me, my faithful subject. Here we have the guard barracks, where we train those new to the order to defend this castle. The good news is that word of your return is spreading. Those I have sent out to recruit new ponies to our cause are finding several eager to try and get on good terms with you. It would seem that not all of Equestria is foolish enough to stand against you. Nightmare Moon didn't offer any words in reply as she watched the soldiers in dark blue armor. They were standing in a line, each one taking turns attacking a set of training dummies under the watchful eye of their trainer. What drew Nightmare Moon's eye, however, was the dummies themselves, which bore a striking resemblance to a certain set of mares. Nexus, why do each of the training dummies look like Twilight Sparkle and the other ponies who bear the elements of harmony? Because it is they who are the greatest threat to you, my queen, Nexus explained. It was they who defeated you, and we shall not let them have the opportunity to do so again. Should they get it in their heads to attempt to bring their unified power against you, they will be dealt with immediately." Nexus's words were punctuated as a guard attacked a training dummy that looked like Twilight Sparkle, and with a single swift motion, beheaded it. The cotton-stuffed head bounced on the ground, rolling towards Nightmare Moon's hooves. She stared at it, then spoke with a firm tone. "No, my queen. Should the bearers of the elements of harmony come to the castle, they are not to be harmed. The elements of harmony themselves are to be taken from them for safekeeping. Then, Twilight Sparkle is to be brought directly to me and the rest of her friends locked in the dungeon. I will then decide how I want to punish them for standing against me once before." "Of course," Nexus replied with an approving and devilish smile. "I can fully understand you desire to punish them with your own hooves." Nightmare Moon turned her back on the training dummies and began to walk towards the door. "Good. Now I want one of the training dummies that looks like Twilight Sparkle brought to my bedchamber as well, and it is to be intact." "It will be there before the end of the tour," Spell Nexus assured, choosing not to question his queen's wishes. The dining hall, of course, is spacious enough for any sort of event, should you ever be interested in holding a gala or other such frivolity, Nexus explained as the pair walked alongside the long, regal table that dominated the center of the dining room. It was made of softly colored brown oak, covered in a night blue tablecloth, and decorated with sterling silver candelabrum, each holding 3 candles. "You'll also be happy to know we have employed a royal chef who is eager to tickle your taste buds with some of his desserts," Nexus said happily. He then motioned to a unicorn standing in the center of the room. This unicorn quickly galloped forward and levitated a tray in front of Nightmare Moon. The tray itself was filled to the brim with expertly decorated cupcakes. The cupcakes had a thick swirl of purple frosting on a chocolate cake, and a single curl of white chocolate delicately set on top.
Seriously, who would have thought making cupcakes would be so hard?
Scootaloo grumbled. The 4 Cutie Mark Crusaders were standing in the middle of a kitchen, which was covered in the messy aftermath of their baking endeavors.
I told you.
Apple Bloom said,
I told you it wasn't easy. So, girls, how are things going?
Pinkie Pie chirped, sticking her head into the kitchen.
Not so good.
Sweetie Belle admitted.
Please don't be mad about the mess.
Nix begged.
Oh, girls, I'm not mad. You should have seen the mess I made in the bakery when I first started working for the cakes. After all, my special talent is throwing parties, not baking.
Pinkie Pie reassured them.
Now, why don't we get this place cleaned up? Then I'll show you how to make cupcakes one more time.
The faces of the 4 fillies lit up with smiles, and they eagerly helped to clean up the mess. Then, under Pinkie Pie's close supervision and unending enthusiasm, each filly managed to make a batch of cupcakes that was not only edible, but good-tasting. Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle made vanilla cupcakes with an apple and chocolate frosting, respectively. Scootaloo and Nix had, in contrast, chosen to make chocolate cupcakes. Nix's cupcakes were frosted with a simple vanilla frosting, but Scootaloo tried to frost hers so that each one would have a rainbow on it. The result of her endeavors, however, was all the frosting colors got mixed together to make a dark purple frosting. Scootaloo was disappointed, but in the end, the cupcakes still tasted good, and that was what mattered. "My queen, do the cupcakes displease you?" Nexus asked, noticing Nightmare Moon had once more fallen silent. "No," she replied before she used her magic to gently nudge away the tray. "I'm just not hungry at the moment. Have some delivered to my chamber. I will taste them later." The chef nodded, galloping off to place the best of his desserts in the bedchamber. At the same time, Nexus showed Nightmare Moon into the kitchen to prove it was capable of handling any and all requests she could make of it or its staff. Whatever high spirits Nightmare Moon was in when she first arrived at her castle were beginning to die down. Each room Spell Nexus showed her dredged up unwanted memories and desires. She was no longer a weak, cowardly filly. She was no longer Nix. Still, the months she had spent as a filly would not give her any peace, and it was putting her in a foul mood. Despite the small headache that was starting to chew on the front of her brain, Nightmare Moon continued to follow Spell Nexus. He seemed to take notice of her degrading mood, and seemed to be rushing through the tail end of the castle tour. She didn't mind the rush, and was thankful when they entered what was going to be the last room on the tour. The moment the door to the chamber opened, a tingling sensation washed over Nightmare Moon. Magic, very powerful magic, was being performed in the chamber. It wasn't anything on the scale that had given her a body of her own, but the power was still respectable. "Spell Nexus, what sort of sorcery is being performed here?" Nightmare Moon asked. She and Spell Nexus walked into the room and her sour mood began to lift. "Research, my queen," Spell Nexus answered with a smile, waving his hoof across the room. "Welcome to the research laboratory." Nightmare Moon eagerly looked across the room. A number of desks and tables were set up about the space. At each workstation a unicorn worked, twisting and bending magical energy. Some of the unicorns seemed to be just casting spells, while others were working with different baubles, trinkets, and equipment. Along with the unicorns there were a number of Pegasi and Earth ponies who were assisting the researchers by taking notes and fetching materials. "Everything," Nightmare Moon quietly muttered with a faint smile. "Tell me everything about the work being done here." Spell Nexus gave an uneasy smile. He was glad that this room seemed to please his queen the most, but the curiosity she displayed was far more intense than he would have expected. Still, he nodded and quickly led her about the room. The first research station they approached was by far the largest. A series of lamps had been mounted above the table, half of them shining with a bright yellow light, while the other half had a pale bluish-white glow. On the table itself, beneath the lamps, several different kinds of plants had been organized into neat rows. There was also a single black barrier separating the one half from the other, ensuring the plants under the yellow lights were separated from the ones under the blue lights. "What is this?" Nightmare Moon asked, looking between the two batches of plants which were similar in appearance. "Here, we are testing our latest batch of plants that can grow under eternal moonlight. We initially focused this research on agricultural plants, such as grains, fruits, and vegetables. Those plants were finished some time ago, and we're ready to begin replanting Equestria's fields, gardens, and orchards with the new plant breeds." "Then what are you currently developing?" Nightmare Moon asked as she inspected the plants more closely. "More frivolous plants, such as flowers, grasses, and less productive species of trees," Nexus answered. "Some of my researchers made a point to mention that Equestria would be far less picturesque without its forests, plains, and flowered towns. I was inclined to agree with them, but I, of course, asked them to focus on flowers that complement your beautiful night before proceeding on to other species." Nightmare Moon gave a satisfied nod as she followed Nexus. Each station had some bit of magic meant to make the eternal night possible, which also meant that she was getting abruptly acquainted with the natural effects of never having any sunlight. The withering plants, the creeping cold, these were things the children of Nightmare were working to solve. Yet, her gut began to twist as Nightmare Moon was faced with her own memories. During the summer sun celebration, she had plunged Equestria into eternal night without considering any of these ramifications. What was she thinking back then? Why did she not realize what the eternal night meant? Ponies would have seen her sky, but they would not have survived for much longer after that. Nightmare Moon tried to remember why she hadn't considered the consequences of her actions, but found she could not. It was like a piece of her memories were missing, the memories surrounding her motivations. She knew she had those motivations, she knew what they were, yet when she tried to remember those motivations directly, what they felt like, and why they had driven her, it was like grasping at nothing. "My queen." Nightmare Moon shook her head, realizing she had zoned out once more. She turned to Spell Nexus, who was looking at her curiously. "Yes?" "I'm sorry, I was wondering if you had any questions for the research team." Nightmare Moon shook her head, turning towards the door. "No, Nexus. I do not have any questions for them. They have been doing good work, and I'm happy to see you've endeavored to make Equestria a paradise of the eternal night." Spell Nexus smiled before he and the whole research team bowed. "You honor us with your kind words." Nightmare Moon huffed, fluttering her wings. "Just make sure that once I have unseated Celestia and Luna from Equestria's throne that you do not waste time transforming Equestria so that it may survive my eternal night. I will not have this country become a frozen wasteland. I assure you, my queen, we will work with all haste to make Equestria a paradise worthy of your rule." "Good," Nightmare Moon said flatly. "Now, I am tired and wish to rest." "Then I'll escort you to your private chambers without delay," Spell Nexus said eagerly before leading Nightmare Moon back into the hallway. "And here are your private chambers, my queen," Nexus said, his horn opening the large, elegant doors. You will find a pair of guards stationed outside at all hours, should you ever need any assistance. Only the finest furniture was selected, and the decorations were picked out by myself. Does it please you?"
"Yes," Nightmare Moon replied, though she had barely even looked at the room before she stepped inside.
"I am honored to hear you say that, my queen. Now, you are undoubtedly tired. I will leave you to your rest, and when you're ready to begin the campaign to seize Equestria, simply have one of my guards come and find me."
"I will,"
Nightmare Moon replied flatly. Then she turned and watched Nexus bow one final time before leaving. He pulled the doors shut behind him, and only then did Nightmare Moon take in the atmosphere and the furnishings of the room. Like the rest of the castle, it was decorated in a nighttime theme, with dark blues and purples accented by moons and stars. A perfectly circular bed sat in the center of the room. It was easily large enough to fit her comfortably, and it rested beneath an intricate fresco of the moon on the ceiling. With only mild interest, Nightmare Moon circled the room once and examined all of the new furniture. There was a fireplace, a vanity mirror, a set of dressers, a few tables, a bookcase, a door to the small exterior balcony, and a writing desk. It was everything some pony would need to enjoy a quiet night in their bedroom, and, as Nexus said, it was all the finest furniture. Still, it did little to improve Nightmare Moon's mood, and after finishing her examination of the furniture, she turned her attention back to the bed. There, resting on a soft-looking blanket, were the two items she had requested during the day: a tray of carefully decorated cupcakes, and the training dummy that resembled Twilight Sparkle. Focusing on the desserts first, Nightmare Moon gently lifted and removed the paper from one of the cupcakes. She then took a single, gingerly bite and smiled at the flavor. It was good. It was moist, smooth, and it tasted so much like the cupcake's Pinkie Pie. The cupcake hit the floor a moment later, thrown across the room by Nightmare Moon's magic. It bounced off the door, crumbling into pieces while part of its frosting stuck to the point of impact. Nightmare Moon then took up the tray as well and slammed it down, along with the remaining cupcakes, against the door. She pressed down hard, using her magic to flatten every single one of the frosted desserts for several seconds before she released her magic. The tray stuck to the door for a moment, but then fell free to reveal the results of Nightmare Moon's anger. The squished mess of cupcake crumbs and frosting. With the tray no longer holding it up, the gooey mess began to slide down the door. It left a trail in its wake, and only stopped once it had reached the floor. The next thing to fall under Nightmare Moon's hateful gaze was the training dummy of Twilight Sparkle. She lifted it up with her magical mane, and held it in front of her face. At first, her grip was careful, gentle, but then she began to squeeze tightly around the dummy's neck. Nightmare Moon stood there for several seconds, strangling the lifeless doll. She then threw it on the ground and proceeded to stomp on it. Again and again she lifted her body up and brought her hooves down on the Twilight dummy. Only when it was leaking cotton from a number of holes and a leg was about to fall off did Nightmare Moon cease her assault. Then, as a final insult to the doll and the pony who resembled it, Nightmare Moon hurled the dummy across the room. It bounced off the floor and ended up disappearing into the space beneath the writing desk. That was where Nightmare Moon chose to leave it. She stomped over to the balcony door, threw it open, and stepped outside her room to look at the exterior of the castle and the cavern it was contained in. She would be Equestria's queen. She would overthrow Celestia and Luna, and she would make Twilight Sparkle pay. Woo! I'm done now. Bye. That was Past Sins, Chapter 11, by Penstroke, assisted by Batty Gloom. I hope you all enjoyed it. This is Vos de Sueños signing off. Safe travels, every pony.